When I say Vulkan, your mind probably jumps to three things: his absurd physical strength, his unmatched ability to forge very powerful weapons, or maybe the fact that the man literally can't die. Well heard, what if I told you that's only scratching the surface? After leapfrogging my way through his feats like Gabriel Angelo's from Dawn of War, I've come to a singular conclusion. If Vulkan does indeed return in the modern setting of 40k, he might just be the strongest Primarch alive. Oh yeah, just like we did with Rogel Dorn, my autistic king, and Leman Russ, who somehow beat the allegations after years of me calling him a furry with a sword. Today, we're doing one thing and one thing only. We're pushing the Vulkan Agenda. So you all know what time it is. It's time to jump headfirst into the goal. By the end of this video, you're either going to embrace the Vulkan Agenda, or you're going to be taking a lava bath alongside our Tellus Numan. So say it with me one more time. It's time to power scale and push the Vulkan Agenda. So before we really start pushing this, as always people, what exactly is an agenda? In power scaling, an agenda is when someone picks their favorite character and builds the strongest possible argument for them using feats, statements, and lore, while maybe conveniently ignoring the anti-feats they have along the way. Now last time, I spent an entire video doing something I never thought I'd do, defending the Wolf King, Leman Russ. A Primarch I've spent almost the entirety of my channel slandering. And by the end of that video, I was ready to throw myself out of a 2-story window.
Oh look, he's flying!
But today, well today is different. Because Vulkan is genuinely one of my favorite Primarchs in all of 40k. Now, he is not my favorite, of course. That title will forever belong to Rogel Dorn. But Vulkan is definitely up there. And considering the amount of Vulkan stans I have in my Discord, who have been patiently awaiting this video, this one is for you guys. So let's start with the most obvious place when talking about Vulkan: his physical abilities, and more specifically, his insane strength. First off, we should start with the obvious. Vulkan is one of, if not the, strongest Primarch in all of 40k. There is just way too much evidence throughout established canon, including multiple books in the Horus Hersey, that support this claim. One of the best examples comes from the short book Forgotten Sons. Vulkan was enraged, battering tanks aside like children's toys. He was not the most gifted swordsman, nor was he a master strategist or psyker of any note. But his strength and fortitude in that, the 18th Primarch was unrivaled. This statement perfectly summarizes Vulkan when comparing his raw strength and durability to the other Primarchs, as the text states that he was beyond any of his brothers in these two categories. And now that his greatest rival, Ferrus Manus, is now dead, no one can really compete with Vulkan in these two categories. In fact, in the book Vulkan Lives, Vulkan outright states that he and he alone is the strongest Primarch. Of all of us, Father made me the strongest. Physically, I have no equal amongst my siblings. In the sparring cages, I used to hold back, especially against you, Conrad. And similar statements like this one appear throughout established canon. For example, in Echoes of Eternity, Vulkan's hammer is said to have been able to shatter a warlord titan's shin. Or in the book Old Earth, Vulkan literally catches a massive falling chunk of the Imperial Wall and holds it up for an extended period of time. Something that would most likely weigh hundreds, if not thousands, of metric tons. And somehow, that's not even his greatest strength feat. No, that comes from the book The Hunt for Vulkan. In that book, Vulkan shoulders the weight of an entire planet. Yes, I'm being serious, fellas, an entire planet. The weight of a planet fell on his shoulders. He withstood the crushing force for several seconds, and then it brought him to his knees. The orc had turned the gravity weapon against him. The greenskin hurled mountains at the sky, and now it forced Vulkan down. His lungs flattened. Drawing a breath was an act of supreme strength. He growled, denying the force that sought to grind his bones to dust. He would not capitulate. He would rise. He would advance. A power that had destroyed worlds held him fast. Yes, the force from this gravity gun did indeed bring Vulkan to his knees, but let's put that into perspective first. The force being applied to him was able to destroy worlds, as the text states, and Vulkan was still able to resist it for several seconds while fighting against a force that was actively trying to crush his bones into dust.
Yeah, buddy! Lightweight!
And even as a child, Vulkan's strength was already insane. He was able to pull Drukhari slave barges out of the sky with his bare hands. So yeah, as you can probably see by now, Vulkan's physical strength is pretty ridiculous. But that is only one part of what makes the Lord of Drakes such a powerful Primarch. Because as insane as his strength is, his durability might be even stronger. For example, in Mercy of the Dragon, we see Vulkan tank an explosion that completely destroys a fortress city. And more than that, it sends tremors that can be felt miles and miles away. A great explosion lit the horizon to the north. Tremors were felt as far as the hills. They ripped Vikov and the old keep apart. Only fire remained. A conflagration so large and ferocious it engulfed the sky like slow spreading ink and turned it red. And at the heart of the blaze, killing with fang and claw a giant and emerald scale. A myth brought terrifyingly to life. So not only did Vulkan survive an explosion that was able to annihilate an entire fortress city, but he just kept fighting on afterwards despite being at the center of the blast. We see a similar level of durability in the anthology Sons of the Emperor, where even Ferrus Manus is left in complete disbelief that Vulkan survives several direct strikes from virus missiles. Nothing could survive, whispered Ferrus, trying to disbelieve the evidence of his own senses. Father, is he asked louder. The Emperor said nothing as an anxious silence stole over the battlefield. The fighting had stopped. Wait, a wary voice came across the Vox. And through the parting smoke across embers of burning wood and stone still flickering, at his laden feet emerged the dragon. He had lost his warhelm and one shoulder guard hung by a ragged thread. There was blood, his own. A crack split his breastplate. He held his left arm close to his body. Ferrus stopped a meter away. You live, though I can't fathom how, he said, and eyed the onyx-skinned giant with wary respect. I must be tougher than I look. So although Vulkan is clearly wounded, Ferrus's reaction tells us everything we need to know. He is straight up shocked that Vulkan survived at all, which just goes to show both how durable Vulkan is and just how destructive those virus missiles must have been. And just like his strength, this level of durability is echoed again and again throughout the Black Library novels. In Old Earth, Vulkan states that he can endure 40 salvos of bolter fire. In Echoes of Eternity, he tanks multiple psychic attacks from Demon Primarch Magnus the Red. You know, one of the strongest psychers in the universe. Again, in Old Earth, he tanks the plague and pestilence unleashed by a great unclean one. And in Vulkan Lives, he even survives being nuked by Perturabo, while a good portion of his legion obviously does not. And outside of these four examples, this is seen repeatedly throughout established canon. So yeah, when it comes to durability, Vulkan is unquestionably among the very best of the Primarchs. Now in terms of speed, Vulkan is never portrayed as being amongst the fastest Primarchs. However, that shouldn't be mistaken for him being slow. Like every one of the D-Gen space babies, Vulkan operates on a level of speed that completely eclipses even the greatest space marines or custodians. And so he has the ability to move and react faster than even transhuman warriors can even perceive. So yeah, he's durable and he's strong and he's probably decently fast. At least for a Primarch. What else could you really even need, folks? Well, apparently Vulkan does, as he has much more baked into his physiology. As according to Mercy of the Dragon, Vulkan is also apparently matched in combat skill with Russ, Horus, and even Fulgrim. Remember kids, Fulgrim is said to be one of the greatest duelists among his brothers. Additionally, Horus also has a direct statement comparing his combat skill with the Lion, who is also one of the greatest duelists among the Primarchs, and well, Leman Russ is, well, Leman Russ. So legitimately, Vulkan might be one of the better duelists among his brothers. And this is backed up by Horus Hersey Model Masterclass Volume 1, which states, an indomitable warrior whose strength in battle was tempered by the depth of his wisdom, Vulkan's fury was a match for any of his brothers. Which does make it appear that Vulkan's skill in combat could make him a match for any of his kin. Man, oh man. So Vulkan might be the strongest, he might be the most durable, and he might even be one of the better duelists. But that's still not the most unique thing about him, because unlike every other Primarch, Vulkan didn't just wield legendary weapons gifted by the Emperor, he created them. Yep, you guessed it, we're next going to talk about his smithing and engineering ability, which, trust me, makes his agenda even more undeniable. One of the most defining aspects of Vulkan's character, and quite possibly one of the things that makes him so dangerous, is his ability to craft insanely powerful and devastating weapons. For example, in the short story Artifacts found in the anthology book War Without End, Vulkan says, I am my father's weapon maker, but unlike Ferris or Perturabo, I specialize in the unique. This quote, besides showing that Vulkan was created to be the Emperor's weapon maker, also shows how he differs from Ferris and Perturabo, who are also engineers and creators. While Ferris and Perturabo were able to forge incredible weapons and technology, their focus was on creating tools that could be reproduced, deployed, and used to wage war on a massive scale. Vulkan, on the other hand, approached smithing as more of an art form. Rather than producing weapons in quantity, he devoted himself to crafting singular masterpieces, pouring immense time and care into every detail. Hence why the text states he specialized in the unique. With this smithing ability, Vulkan has created many wonders. And as it's stated in that short novella, Artifacts, it appears many of these relics are able to destroy worlds entirely. So you're probably asking yourself, why do you bring this up, Cal? Well, because Vulkan has created many relics of immense power throughout 40k, such as Dawnbringer, which was practically indestructible with a built-in teleporter, or Kassar's Mantle, which is said to be almost impenetrable, or Yrdrak, which was even able to destroy the necrodermis of Ferris Manus' hands. And this is an insane feat, because necrodermis is one of the strongest metals in the 40k universe. As according to the 9th edition Necron Codex, necrodermis is beyond simple armored toughness. The Necrons also benefit from a technology known as living metal. This substance can alter its molecular state in a semi-sentient fashion, flowing and replicating to heal battle damage as fast as it is inflicted. And although the durability of this metal differs depending on the author writing it, but mostly we see it tanking bolter fire, tank rounds, shotgun rounds, and powerful energy blasts. You know what? I'm just gonna read the excerpt. He brought Yrdrak down upon the silver arm, and the inviolable became violable. It shattered as glass shatters before a heavy blow, and scattered across the arena. A few fragments touched Ogg's boots, and he reached for them before withdrawing his hand. These are the same hands that, as stated in the Horus Hersey Model Masterclass Volume 1, could have one-shot Fulgrim if he had landed a blow. And in Horus Hersey Book 2 Massacre, Ferris' hands were stated to be able to splinter ceramite like thawing ice, and even the flesh and bone of a Primarch could offer little defense against them. And Vulkan still shatters it in one blow, making it kind of a feat for his strength and for his weapon. Even when he returned during the War of the Beast in M32, Vulkan was able to forge Doom Tremor, Another incredibly powerful hammer so massive and dense that even Space Marines clad in Terminator plates were unable to lift it. The weapon also possessed the ability to teleport short distances as well as absorb vast amounts of energy, something Vulkan ultimately used to create an explosion that seemingly killed both himself and the beast. But come on now fellas, we all know Vulkan isn't staying dead. GW needs to make money somehow. Now you're probably wondering to yourself, why the hell is Cow bringing all of this up? Well folks, in addition to the physical stats Vulkan already has, a massive part of his agenda is his ability to craft incredibly powerful and lethal weapons. Doom Tremor wasn't crafted on Mars or on some ancient Dark Age of technology forged world. No, Vulkan crafted it on the agricultural world of Calderia.
But farming? Really? Man of your talents?
With nowhere near the resources the modern Imperium has at its disposal. It was essentially that one Tony Stark scene from Iron Man 1. Vulkan was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps. If he was able to produce a weapon that powerful under those conditions, then imagine what he could create if he returned in the current setting of 40k. Working alongside Gilliman with access to the Mechanicum, Nocturne's forges, and the vast industrial might of the Imperium. I know for a fact he would be wielding some of the best weapons you've ever seen in your cow life. Probably stuff that would make Drachnian look like a Minecraft pickaxe. Just imagine Vulkan rocking up to a fight with a demon Primarch, clad in war gear that nullifies psychic attacks, absorbs incoming energy, or flat out deflects enemy blows, all while wielding weapons that are able to shatter a planet. Yeah, didn't I tell you this was an essential part of the Vulkan agenda? But somehow we're still not at the most broken part of Vulkan's toolkit. Unlike his brothers, who will eventually die, or in the case of the demon Primarchs, be banished, if they're dealt a lethal wound, Vulkan on the other hand will simply get right back up. And you all know what I'm talking about. This brings us to perhaps the single most important pillar of the entire Vulkan agenda, his undying nature as a perpetual. So first things first, what is a perpetual? Essentially, a perpetual is an immortal and nearly indestructible being. If one were to die or be seriously injured, they would eventually return to life. Now whether that would take days, weeks, or even years isn't really known, since there isn't an exact time frame for them to revive, as it appears that every perpetual is different, as John Chromaticus explains in the book Vulkan Lives. But regardless, the fact remains. If a perpetual is shot, stabbed, nuked, or thrown into the vacuum of space, it doesn't matter. They will eventually return unless they are killed by something incredibly unique, such as the Fulgrite, the biggest MacGuffin in 40k history. Yeah fellas, this item is quite literally a frozen shard of the Emperor's power. Which makes me think the question, how the hell did they get this during the Horus Hersey? And well, my cow brain has no idea. But that is besides the point, people. Vulkan, as you all probably know, is one of these perpetual beings. And because of that, he is effectively impossible to permanently kill. Throughout the Horus Heresy and the War of the Beast, we've seen Vulkan die many times. That yes, Games Workshop, we get the point.
What is my purpose?
To die over and over again, to show the reader that 1, you're immortal, and 2, to add stakes to the heresy.
Oh my god.
Yeah, welcome to the club, pal.
But most of these deaths come from the book Vulkan Lives.
Ironic.
During this novel, Vulkan is repeatedly killed and tortured by Conrad Kurz. You know, the schizophrenic Primarch of the Night Lords. And throughout the extent of this book, Kurz kills Vulkan in some seriously inventive ways. For example, he personally rips off Vulkan's head, rips out his throat with a fork, stabs him through the chest, and tears him limb from limb. shoots him with hundreds of bolters at close range, leaves him inside a venting shaft of a starship engine, and even throws him into the emptiness of space completely butt naked. But no matter what Kurz does, Vulkan always returns. How many? Kurz narrowed his eyes. I clarified my question. How many times have you tried to kill me? You see them? He pointed to the numerous honor scars branded into my back. Some stood out from the others, a clutch of more recent brandings that I had no memory of, and I could attribute no oath to. Kurz leaned in and whispered into my ear, a fresh scar every time, brother. There were dozens. I am at a loss, Vulkan. I don't know what to do with you. Then release me. What is the point of killing me over and over again if I can't die? So let's just say Vulkan has died quite a few times. But even with all of these deaths, we can make the conclusion that if Vulkan is killed by any conventional means, he will inevitably return. But with that said though, there are some weapons that can permanently kill perpetuals, especially those involving immense psychic power. For example, in the book Unremembered Empire, John Chromaticus is able to permanently kill Vulkan with the Fulgrite, the weapon we talked about earlier, a frozen shard of the Emperor's psychic power. But even then, Vulkan is still able to come back after Artillus Numan chucks himself into a volcano. I still don't understand how that revived Vulkan, and Nick Kime even said himself it's up for your interpretation, which is by far the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my cow life.
Why are you the way that you are? Honestly, every time I try to do something fun or exciting, you make it not that way. I hate so much about the things that you choose to be.
But that is besides the point. Pretty much, Vulkan's regeneration and perpetual nature is just absolutely ridiculous, allowing him to get up and keep fighting against some of the stronger opponents in the 40k universe. But beyond the fact that Vulkan literally can't die, his perpetual nature also appears to function differently compared to the other perpetuals we've seen throughout the Horus Hersey. What I mean by that is Vulkan's resurrection and regeneration seems to become faster and faster the more he dies. For example, in the book Vulkan Lives, Vulkan initially takes a long period of time to regenerate after Kurz kills him. However, as the story progresses, that regeneration process begins speeding up. How long, I croaked, tasting ash in my mouth and feeling a fresh brand in my back. A few hours. It's getting faster. And this is supported later in the book Unremembered Empire. Vulkan retched himself away. His side, left leg, and the tiles beneath him ran with blood. He staggered and then fell onto the roof with a clatter of armor and cracking slates. He twitched violently and fell still. Kurz spat out clots of blood and phlegm. The wind whipped at his filthy hair. See, he demanded, this is death. Learn to accept it, brother. Vulkan's eyes snapped open. Oh, said Conrad Kurz in disappointment. That was quick.
Oh.
So here we see Vulkan die, and only seconds later, he returns. By the end of this book, Unremembered Empire, Vulkan's regeneration is occurring at an absolutely ridiculous rate, with the novel even describing it like this. John approached the fallen Primarch, raising the spear. The copper stench of blood was overwhelming. Vulkan came back from the dead once again. It was happening faster. It was happening faster and faster each time. New life followed each death at an increasingly fearsome rate. Vulkan's rage was such that he would not let death keep him for even a second. Now there are two possible ways to interpret this. Either Vulkan's regeneration speed is directly connected to the severity of his injuries, meaning the less damage required to kill him, the faster he returns, or over time, Vulkan's perpetual nature itself becomes more efficient, causing his resurrection and regeneration speed to accelerate with every death. Personally though, I lean towards the first explanation, because we do see Vulkan take significantly longer to recover from certain deaths, such as his fall from orbit on Macragge. But I will admit, the mechanics behind Vulkan's perpetual nature are a little confusing. But regardless, the truth remains that no matter how many times Vulkan dies, he will always come back. So let's do the math here, folks. We have a Primarch who's arguably the physically strongest, one of the most durable, one of the most skilled, able to create some of the most powerful weapons in 40k, and on top of all of that, he is effectively immortal against almost every conventional attack in the setting. Man, oh man, what a guy.
That doesn't seem fair.
But as insane as all of that sounds, what if I told you that Vulkan has also fought some of the stronger beings in the 40k setting? Yep, that's right. We're next moving on to the final and longest part of this agenda, going through each of Vulkan's major fights throughout 40k, and seeing how he performed against these top tier hitters. Because trust me, Vulkan stands, this is essential to the Vulkan agenda. There are several fights we're going to be looking at today, and man, oh man, they are absolutely drenched in context. So this section of my video may end up being a little longer compared to the others. But hey, this is a Fallen Gao video about one of the best boys in the galaxy. What else did you expect? The fights we'll be evaluating in today's video are Vulkan's fight with Mortarion during the Dropside Massacre, his duel with Conrad Kurz in Unremembered Empire, his fight against Magnus the Red, who is only missing his Noble Shard in Fury of Magnus, his duel against Demon Primarch Magnus in Echoes of Eternity within the Webway, and finally his fight against the Beast in The Beast Must Die. Now since I know someone's going to address this, let me cover my tracks. No, I am not going to include Kurz vs Vulkan in the book Vulkan Lives, because the text makes it appear that Kurz wanted Vulkan to kill him the entire time. So it's less of a duel and more of Kurz trying to get himself killed. So no, I will not be factoring that into the Vulkan agenda. So we're going to start off with the very brief but incredibly interesting fight against Mortarion during the Dropside Massacre, which in universe only lasts around 90 minutes on Istvan 5. This is seen in the book, surprise surprise, Dropside Massacre. The Death Lord reverses the arc of his scythe swing. Ursus knows that his next moment will never come, a blur in the fog. Mortarion twists, a hand grips the haft of his scythe and stops it dead. Ursus looks up, it is Vulkan. The two Primarchs are eye to eye, close enough to embrace. The hammer and the scythe of each are locked together. Vulkan's armor is streaked with half-dissolved liqueur. Corrosive moisture beads on the drake scales of his cloak. Vulkan twists free and strikes. Their hammer blow lands with force enough to crush mountains and shatter tanks. But the Death Lord is standing, twisting the scythe free into a cut that thrums the air like a rotor blade. Scythe strikes Hammerhead once, twice, and a third time. And that's basically their entire fight, with the text concluding with both Primarchs still locked in combat. From this, we can only really gather two major things. First, Vulkan is able to catch a Primarch strike with his bare hand, which is an incredibly impressive feat. Primarch weapons are not exactly something you can casually stop. And the fact that Vulkan can grab the haft of Mortarion's scythe and completely halt its momentum speaks volumes about his physical strength. However, we also see Mortarion withstand multiple blows from Vulkan. And honestly, I think this is less of an anti-feat for Vulkan and more of a feat for Mortarion. Remember folks, these aren't casual attacks. Vulkan's hammer strikes are explicitly described as having enough force to crush mountains and shatter tanks. And Mortarion is still able to take several of these hits and continue fighting. Unfortunately, we don't know the outcome of their fight, so we can't make any definitive statements about who would have won. But what we can take away is that Vulkan is physically able to contend with one of the most durable Primarchs. Yeah, so for a fight that only lasts a few paragraphs, there are quite a few takeaways from it. And for all you Mortarion fans out there, if I see at least 30 to 40 comments asking, or dare I say begging, for a Mortarion agenda video, I may just have to listen to the herd. I am simply a democratic cow at the end of the day.
Somebody get these beggars out of here!
Next, we move on to Vulkan's second fight. This one is against Konrad Curze in the book Unremembered Empire. And there is some extremely important context we need to establish first before looking at their duel. This fight takes place after Vulkan has plummeted onto the planet of Macragge from orbit. And after everything he has endured, he is very clearly not in the right mental state. Pretty much, Vulkan is completely broken, mentally unstable, and consumed by rage and pain. As the book states, Vulkan lunged. With an anguished scream of rage and horror, he leapt up and threw himself across the cell at Guilliman. The attack was so sudden and so violent that Guilliman started back from the protective armor glass in surprise, howling words that meant nothing and sounds that meant every pain in the galaxy. Vulkan hammered his fists against the glass until it was slippery with blood and tissue fluid from his healing, still forming flesh. His teeth were brilliant white enamel chips in his screaming mouth. "The salamanders who have come to your hall were right, my lord," said Titus Praeto. "Vulkan lives. But whatever he has endured, it has driven him mad. Your brother, my lord, is quite insane." And if that wasn't enough, Vulkan is also fighting while wearing a makeshift suit of armor and wielding a weapon that is nowhere near his normal war gear. As Unremembered Empire describes, it was clad in mismatched armor plate and mail, all purloined from Guilliman's trophy hall, armor built to fit a Primarch scale. It wielded a battle mace, a fine piece that Rabute had used early in the Great Crusade. Now, this isn't to say that Guilliman's armor or weaponry is weak. Obviously, anything created for a Primarch is going to be incredibly powerful. But compared to Vulkan's actual war gear, such as the equipment he carried during the Great Crusade or the Horus Hersey, like your Dracul or Dawnbringer, this is almost certainly a downgrade. And there's also the fact that Vulkan is taller than Guilliman, meaning the suit of armor he would have been equipped with would have been smaller than his actual size. So Vulkan enters this battle mentally unstable and consumed by rage, and with all of these caveats, he fights one of who I think is at least either a top 5 or top 6 base Primarch. Yes folks, yes, I think Konrad Curze is one of the stronger base Primarchs.
I'm gonna give it right back.
Intentional glazing, 15-yard penalty, and no milk after dinner. And my reasoning, well, he fights Lionel Johnson pretty damn well throughout the Horus Hersey. Their duel begins after Vulkan tackles Curze out of Guilliman's office window, saving Guilliman's mother in the process, which obviously earns some major brownie points from your favorite fallen cow. The two Primarchs then continue their battle across the rooftops of Macragge. Throughout their fight, Vulkan is able to repeatedly drive Curze back with his stolen mace, landing several powerful strikes that stagger and wound the Night Haunter, eventually sending him crashing through the rooftops of the Regency. Curze, however, is still an extremely powerful opponent. Using his speed and skill, the Night Haunter is able to evade some of Vulkan's heavier attacks, and counters with his lightning claws, pulling himself closer to Vulkan in what the text literally calls an embrace. He then drives his claws through Vulkan's borrowed armor and into his body, stabbing him multiple times and tearing through his eternal organs before bringing the Salamander's Primarch down. Well, down for the first time, because as we talked about earlier, death is only temporary when it comes to Vulkan, as he awakens only moments later and immediately returns to the fight. The two continue exchanging blows, with neither Primarch gaining a decisive advantage. But I will say that throughout the extent of their fight, Curze is actively running away from Vulkan. And as he runs, Vulkan chucks his mace at Curze, which hits him in the head and knocks him down for a brief moment. Curze responds by using Vulkan's own mace against him, striking him hard enough to shatter his jaw. As their fight continues, an Ultramarine Storm Eagle interrupts them as Curze jumps onto one of them in an attempt to escape. Vulkan refuses to let him go and leaps onto the same aircraft and attempts to bring Curze down. But unfortunately for the Lord of Drakes, Curze still has Vulkan's mace. And while Vulkan is slowly dragging himself towards the Night Haunter, Curze takes that opportunity to hurl Vulkan's own mace back at him, sending Vulkan crashing onto the walls of Macragge.
That's rough, buddy.
So later in the Unremembered Empire, they fight again. And this time around, Vulkan has reacquired Dawnbringer, allowing him to teleport between Curze and John Chromaticus, and land multiple devastating hammer blows that force Kurz back. The two Primarchs then engage in a rapid exchange of blows, moving so quickly that they become blurs as they trade attacks. Vulkan abruptly connected in a fundamental way. His huge broad back and massive arms slammed the hammer into Kurz's torso. Plasteel cracked like a gunshot. Kurz, seemingly no more than a bundle of black rags, was hurled backwards. He brought down two of the quad's pillars in a rain of stones and dust, and smashed through the wall into one of the empty sheds. But Kurz gets right back up and throws himself at Vulkan, striking at him with his lightning claws. But Vulkan is able to brace himself and land several vicious strikes that send the Night Hunter stumbling back across the yard. Their duel is ultimately interrupted when a demon is unleashed, dragging Kurz out of the battle and removing him from the field, before either Primarch can achieve a decisive victory. So what can we actually gather from their duel? Well, first and most importantly, we have to remember the circumstances surrounding Vulkan. He is far from fighting at his peak, and despite those disadvantages, Vulkan still performs incredibly well. From the very beginning, Vulkan is able to force Kurz back, land blow after blow with the stolen mace, and later with Dawnbringer. While Kurz is definitely able to hurt Vulkan and even kill him temporarily, it doesn't really affect Vulkan too much, because moments later, even if he dies, he will simply return to the fight. If we look at this duel objectively, Vulkan and Kurz are essentially locked in a deadlock. And just remember who we're talking about here. Conrad Kurz, one of the more dangerous Primarchs, who possesses one of the more unique abilities in the form of his precognition. Now, I'm going to admit that Kurz's future sight is rather complicated and also a little confusing. Sometimes it functions almost like direct knowledge of the future, while other times it appears unreliable or unclear. But in the book Unremembered Empire, we see Kurz directly use his abilities to predict future events. Kurz squatted beside hatch 22-3, waiting for it to open. Pre-science had shown this to him. Hatch 22-3 was where the repair crews would emerge if a cargo hatch blew on the 99th. It took them 18 seconds. The hatch opened and light shafted out. The Night Hunter tilted back so as not to be seen immediately. So at least in this book, Kurz appears capable of seeing and reacting to immediate future events. And since Vulkan faces Kurz later in that same book, then Vulkan is fighting a Primarch who can anticipate his movements and still manages to push him into an extremely difficult battle. And even more important than precognition, Kurz is easily, yes easily, one of the better Primarch duelists in the setting. I know some of you are probably flabbergasted right now, and may be calling me a biased cow, which I will admit I kinda am to my schizophrenic king. But in this same book, Unremembered Empire, Kurz is able to fight both Guilliman and the Lion at the same time. And later in Angels of Caliban, Kurz is shown pushing the Lion to his utmost limits. This time, there was no taunting, no cat and mouse. Kurz's claws whirled and slashed with insane fury, and it took all of the Lion's focus to defend himself against the assault. He was forced to give ground, a storm crackling between him and the Night Hunter, as field sheathed swords and lightning claws clashed and shrieked. "You can't kill me," roared Kurz, lancing a claw towards the Lion's throat. The blow deflected by a last-minute swing of his short sword. "You don't kill me." The words seemed to settle Kurz, though the ferocity of his attack did not relent. A dozen new rents opened up across the Lion's armor amidst the flood of blows. He felt the burn of a near miss sear across his forehead, momentarily blinding him in his right eye. So yeah, we have Kurz here pushing the Lion back and making him use every iota of his skill to defend himself. This is pretty insane because the Lion himself is widely considered one of the greatest duelists among the Primarchs. Personally, I would place the Lion firmly in the top 3 when considering the base Primarchs. And still, Kurz has fought him 5 times throughout the Horus Hersey, and in most of their fights, he puts up quite a good showing. So all things considered, this fight against Kurz and Unremembered Empire is a really good feat for Vulkan. So hypothetically, a fully equipped, mentally stable Vulkan fighting at his peak would have probably fared much better. If this is what Vulkan can do at his absolute lowest, imagine what he could do when fully equipped and healthy. This leads us to his third fight. And this time, it's against an almost fully formed Magnus the Red in the book Fury of Magnus. Now, as I said, this fight is also dripping with context. The version of Magnus Vulkan faces is still missing his noblest shard, which if you've read The Siege of Terra, you would know is now bound to the Grey Knight's new Grand Master, Giannis. But that doesn't mean Magnus isn't powerful, because moments earlier in that same book he fights Vulkan in, Fury of Magnus, Magnus the Red was still able to one-shot Malcador the Sigillite by burning him alive. Malcador's corpse was char black, skeleton of heat-fused bones and roasted meat. His fleshless skull lolled on the last remnants of sinew and spinal cord, the meat of his once great mind oozing from the molten bone of his skull. So yeah, this Magnus is still definitely powerful. Also on a side note, it's kinda weird that Malcador can be just straight up killed by Magnus, and another Perpetual has to sacrifice their life to bring Malcador back. I always thought Malcador was a Perpetual, and I think he still is, because Erda says as much in the book Saturn IX. But Magnus still is able to permanently kill him, and apparently on accident as well. I know this is kinda random, but let me know down in the comments if you think Malcador is a Perpetual or not. But yeah, back to their fight, which begins when Magnus refuses the Emperor's offer to rejoin the Imperium and proceeds to chuck a flaming spear at the seated Emperor. But Vulkan steps in the way and with a giant swing of his hammer, knocks the flaming spear away. Vulkan then charges at Magnus and the two smash into each other and begin to duel. Vulkan first smashes his hammer into Magnus's hip, crushing bone and tearing muscle. In return, Magnus buries the tip of his spear through Vulkan's shoulder guard. And as the two Primarchs fight, a group of Salamanders nearby do remark that Magnus's foresight is giving him an advantage in their duel. Abadimi had seen his Primarch in battle before, and knew he was a sublime close combat specialist. Yet against Magnus, he moved as though hopelessly outclassed. Every feint was ignored, every killing strike turned aside with his spear, dodged or easily blocked. The sorcerer sees our father's every move before he makes it, cried Gargo. Man, what is it with Vulkan fighting enemies who can use foresight? It's just not fair, man. Magnus is then able to ram his spear into Vulkan's back. But Vulkan responds by cracking the butt of his staff against Magnus's helmet, and then follows that up by ducking Magnus's next strike by smashing Urdrakul under Magnus's chin, snapping Magnus's head back and imploding his cheek. The Crimson King, though, does what any other magician would naturally do. He begins to pull up pieces of the throne room and hurl them at Vulkan, but Vulkan is able to smash his way through them. But unfortunately for the Lord of Drakes, Magnus actually uses his brain for once. Magnus laughed, his hands extended to either side as he ripped steel cabling from the ground and machines of the golden dais. They whipped through the air, lashing around Vulkan's wrists and ankles. He fought them, but that only pulled them tighter. Magnus clenched his fists and the bindings drew taut. The spear of Magnus lifted into the air, its tip too bright to look upon. If I must be damned with my sons, I will be full damned, brother. The Crimson King nodded and his spear leapt forward like an unleashed marauder from the launcher of an embarkation deck. It punched through their sire's breastplate, tearing through his chest, heart, and lungs, before exploding from his back and arching high into the air. Vulkan did not cry out or flinch. He kept going, pulling taut at the steel, cutting through his armor and crushing the bones within. Step by step, he persisted.
Oh my god, he's so goddamn cool!
So yeah, Vulkan gets wrapped up and literally gets a flaming spear shot through his chest, but he still keeps pushing forward, attempting to break out, with the text even stating he didn't even flinch. Wow, what a fella. Now next, what happens is the Salamanders in the throne room intervene, and free Vulkan, while another, named Zytos, pushes Vulkan out of the way of a strike that the text calls a treasonous blow to end his legend in an instant. Zytos, of course, dies with this blow, and with his death, Vulkan and the other Salamanders quite literally jump Magnus and begin beating the absolute shit out of him. A classic example of a JJK jumping. Twice armed, hammer blow after hammer blow rained down on the Crimson King. The first crushed his shoulder guard. The second buckled the molded surface of his breastplate. The last of its curling horns splintered under his reverse stroke. Vulkan spun low, and a third blow destroyed Magnus's knee. A fourth slammed into his side and shattered his ribs. Magnus reeled, forced back in the face of this relentless fury. Flames exploded from Vulkan's fists as he smashed his brother in the face again and again. He drove him to his knees. Magnus's crimson mane erupted in flames, his skin charring to black, bone gleamed whitely as his flesh sloughed from his skull. Magnus, of course, does not recover from this onslaught, as he is wounded again and again until he finally gives in to Tzeentch, selling his soul to the Chaos God for demonhood and salvation. Thus their duel ends as Magnus is banished from the throne room by the Emperor's Aegis, due to his new form's nature. So what can we gain from this fight? Well, even though the text does state that Vulkan was initially outmatched by Magnus's foresight, it does not appear to last that way for very long, as Vulkan is able to endure Magnus's attacks and then immediately capitalize, landing 3 quick and devastating strikes. After this point, Magnus begins to rely more heavily on his true psychic abilities, rather than simply engaging Vulkan in a physical duel. So I think it's safe to conclude that Vulkan, who is, once again facing a Primarch with precognition or foresight, is still able to find an opening and gain an advantage in combat. Now I know some people are going to ask, if Magnus or Kurz, as we discussed previously, have foresight, how are their opponents even able to land attacks on them at all? Well heard, just because you have foresight does not mean you can automatically stop everything that is about to happen. Now yes, the Salamanders do intervene in their fight. Still say if Vulkan had remained trapped, what is Magnus going to do? Sure, he can crush him, he can choke him, he could even kill him. But come on guys, do I need to say it again? Death does not matter to Vulkan. Even if Magnus kills him in 1,000 different ways, Vulkan would still simply return.
Are you sure?
Unless Magnus can do exactly what he did in Malkador, which I'm still confused about. If we are being honest, Vulkan is Magnus's perfect counter. Since on one hand, we have a Primarch who can manipulate matter and atoms like that, normally those abilities would kill any other Primarch. But when it comes to Vulkan, it doesn't matter what Magnus does, since Vulkan will just come back.
I'm fucking done! Fuck you! Fuck you!
And would you look at that? The next fight we're looking at is Vulkan facing down against Magnus yet again. But this time, Magnus is now an empowered demon Primarch, and is considerably more powerful. As according to Plague Wars, Magnus as a demon Primarch is far stronger than ever before. They are not legends. Magnus is more powerful than he ever was in the days of Enlightenment. Said Gilliman, I have witnessed his ability. Sure, this statement comes 10,000 years after the Siege of Terra, but the point still stands. That Demon Primarch Magnus is far stronger than the state we see him in Fury of Magnus. This second fight occurs in the heart of the Webway, as Vulkan goes to stop Magnus from weakening the Emperor's wards on the Webway Gate. Initially in their duel, Vulkan seems to hit nothing but smoke and statues, destroying illusions conjured by Magnus to stall for time. This goes on for some time, until Vulkan finds Magnus kneeling in a ritual to weaken the Emperor. And then, that is when their duel begins. And if you've ever watched Doctor Strange, you already know where this is going. Vulkan dies over and over and over and over and over again. Magnus pretty much tries everything. He beheads him with his sword, turns his lungs to amber, drains his blood, and burns him alive with psychic fire. But nothing seems to work. Every time Vulkan dies, he simply regenerates at the Wraith Bridge and comes back for more.
die.
Now, Vulkan's regeneration does appear to be enhanced by the Emperor in some way, so this isn't necessarily his normal level of regeneration. But the feat still stands. Magnus repeatedly kills Vulkan, and Vulkan just keeps coming back. But slowly and surely, Vulkan begins to wear him down, wounding him as the demon Primarch begins to tire from the extended duration of their duel.
I'm tired of this, Grandpa.
That's too damn bad.
He watched the sorcerer emerge from the mist. Watched the way Magnus landed on the bridge with a frenzied resignation that stank like panic. The demon was bleeding, his flesh discolored from damage that seemed slower to regenerate each time. Every time Magnus took flight, he'd vanish into the webway's mist and reappear a moment later screaming in frustration. Again and again and again. The creature launched itself into the fog only to emerge from the mist back above the bridge. Eventually, Magnus attempts to convince Vulkan to stop by entering his mind, taking the form of his once noble self, and attempts to explain his actions. But Vulkan, as the Chad he has always been and always will be, tells him your mom's a hoe, and that he was reckless for his use of sorcery that turned him into a slave of chaos. And so, Magnus gets so offended by this that he attempts to atomize Vulkan from existence. Physically, Vulkan came apart at the biological seams. His black skin ruptured with holes that siphon light. These bloodless ruptures spread through his bones, his organs, his armor. What remained of his skin ignited, then blew away an instant later as ash in the webway's sourceless breeze. A partially articulated skeleton bound together by disintegrating tendons staggered back as its eyeballs caught fire. And yet, he couldn't understand how the man in front of him could still be on his feet. He couldn't believe this flayed, immolated thing, being erased from existence, endured all this and still swung its hammer. He couldn't lose here. He couldn't die. He couldn't. So even after being atomized like Rorschach, Vulkan is still able to defeat Magnus the Red and banish him from the webway. Now, there isn't a ton we can take away from this fight. Vulkan spends most of it getting deleted over and over again. And since his regeneration is clearly being enhanced by the Emperor, I can't overtly state that Vulkan would be able to replicate this feat. But you just gotta remember the version of Magnus Vulkan is fighting. Magnus is essentially a cosmic level demon Primarch. One that can casually manipulate a Primarch's biology and even tear him apart molecule by molecule. I mean, put any other Primarch in Vulkan's shoes and they simply die. It wouldn't even have been a contest by any margin. Say if you threw the Lion or even Sanguinius in this same fight, what are they going to do when the demon Primarch they're facing is able to literally manipulate their biology and physiology? They literally can't do anything.
Reason number 2. Look what I can do.
What? What does that have to do with it?
No. He's got a point.
Which finally brings us to Vulkan's last major duel. This occurs 1500 years later during the War of the Beast. And as always, people, let's set the scene with some context. Or I guess more importantly, just how powerful is the Beast? Well, just look at this dude. Doesn't he look pretty damn strong? If you said no, you need to go to the doctor and get your eyes checked, since the Beast is one of the most powerful orc war bosses to have ever lived. In fact, his Waaagh was the largest the galaxy had ever seen, eclipsing even the one Horus defeated during the Ulanor campaign. Now, as for the Beast, he stood around 10 meters tall, and as we know from the book Fabius Bile, Clone Lord, the Krorks, the superior ancient ancestors of the orcs, are around 12 meters tall. So we can assume that the Beast is at least a prime orc, and should have insane durability, strength, speed, and insane intelligence. Besides his physical abilities, he was armored to the teeth, resembling a literal walking fortress. On one of his arms, he wielded multiple heavy vehicle-grade weapons, including 2 battle cannons, autocannons, missile launchers, and flamers. And remember, orcs do have 2 arms. And so, on his other arm, he wielded a gigantic vibro mace that was nearly as tall as an entire space marine. So yeah, the Beast was packing some serious equipment. And to make matters even crazier, when the fight begins between him and Vulkan, the Beast is able to one-shot the Ultramarines Chapter Master. As seen in the book, the Beast must die. The last words to leave Odaenathus's lips proved painfully prescient. The Great Beast hurled a flame-wreathed fist, and a blast of unimaginable power smashed into the Ultramarines Chapter Master, smearing his remains across several meters of granite. For a couple of seconds, Corlin couldn't drag his eyes away from the droplets of molten armor and the blood-grease stain that had once been his fellow commander. All that he was, all that he might have become, had been ended with contemptuous ease. This is the being Vulkan fought. With the other Space Marines providing covering fire, Vulkan steps forward to challenge the Orc Warlord to single combat. The two first exchange devastating blows that shake the chamber, with Vulkan repeatedly landing powerful hammer strikes that crack the beast's armor, shattering its thigh and forcing it to stagger away in pain. But in return, the Great Beast tears open Vulkan's chestplate with its power claws, sends him flying with a monstrous kick and punch, and repeatedly demonstrates that he is superior when it comes to strength. Realizing that brute force alone won't be enough to defeat the Beast, Vulkan orders Corlan and the remaining Space Marines to evacuate, revealing that he has another plan. Left alone, the two Titans continue their fight. Vulkan manages to wound the Beast several more times, even splitting its skull with Doom Tremor. But the Orc's immense, regenerative abilities allow it to quickly heal. The Beast even goes as far to mock Vulkan, asking if that was the hardest he could hit. Which, considering he's saying this to the physically strongest Primarch, is pretty damn crazy. During the heat of their battle, Vulkan realizes they're fighting directly beside the reactor powering the Beast's fortress. And so he deliberately maneuvers the Orc into position before tackling both of them into the reactor's immense Wa energy field. Inside the reactor, Vulkan experiences a vision revealing the true nature of the Orc's psychic network, showing him that the Beast can't be defeated through conventional means. And as the Great Beast begins choking the life out of him, Vulkan embraces the overwhelming Wa energy flowing through the reactor. And before the Beast can realize something is amiss, Vulkan drives Doom Tremor into the Beast's face and overloads the hammer's power field, triggering a massive explosion that destroys them both. So once again, I won't lie, Vulkan doesn't exactly dominate this fight. The Great Beast is simply overpowering him. And if this were a straight-up contest of raw physical strength, Vulkan would have lost. In fact, Vulkan outright admits this in the book. There really was no way to stop the Great Beast by any conventional means. Such power could not be destroyed, only diverted. Now once again though, this is not an anti-feat by any margins. The Beast is incredibly powerful. He is the largest and strongest Orc we've ever seen in canon. So yeah, the Beast is bigger than the Orc the Emperor fought in the book The Wolf of Ash and Fire. He's bigger than Gazgul Mak Urak Thraka, and even bigger than Tuska Demon Killa. In fact, the Beast is only around 6.5 feet shorter than an actual Krork. The legendary beings that fought during the War in Heaven against the Necrons and the Catan. A war where the destruction of planets was commonplace. So while I wouldn't outright say the Beast is a Krork, he almost certainly scales somewhere in that direction. The Beast is pretty much a being who simply outclasses any loyalist Primarch in terms of physical ability and stats. And Vulkan still performs pretty damn well. So even when facing an opponent who surpasses him in arguably his two greatest attributes, which is strength and durability, Vulkan still manages to force a mutual kill. Not through superior physical stats, but through technology, intelligence, experience, resilience, and goddamn sheer determination. To me, that's another piece of evidence that Vulkan belongs among the stronger base Primarchs. He may not have the best raw stats, but when facing superior opponents, he repeatedly proves that he has the intelligence, durability, skill, and will to find a way to win. And that brings us to the heart of this entire video. What if Vulkan actually returned in the modern setting? So after everything we've discussed in today's video, what would happen if Vulkan did indeed return in the modern setting of Warhammer 40k? Well, I think the answer is pretty damn clear. Vulkan would immediately enter the conversation as one of, if not outright, the strongest Primarch in the entire Imperium. And just in case you forgot from earlier in this video, before Vulkan disappeared, he was a Primarch who could survive the weight of an entire planet, possessed the skill and combat ability to match some of the greater Primarchs like Horus, Russ, or Fulgrim, and even outside of combat, Vulkan was arguably the greatest smith humanity had ever produced. Able to create weapons that could destroy planets, absorb energy, or even teleport. But above all of that is Vulkan's ability to never die. His perpetual nature means that unless you possess an incredibly powerful psychic weapon, or some ability specifically designed to permanently bypass his immortality, killing or wounding Vulkan is only a temporary solution. You can defeat him, you can destroy him, or you can even erase him from reality, but no matter what, Vulkan will always return. And the greatest part about the Vulkan Agenda is that we've already seen Vulkan test his abilities against some of the more powerful beings in the entire setting. He has fought Kurz and Magnus, two Primarchs who possessed precognition. He has fought Mortarion, one of the more durable Primarchs. He has even fought the Beast, an orc that was far beyond the level of a normal base Primarch, and potentially one of the closest things we have seen to an ancient Krork. And if you look at Vulkan's record, yes, he sure may have died a whole lot, but most of the time, he came out victorious. Like hell, he defeated Magnus the Red not once, but twice. And that alone has to count for something, fellas. And now imagine taking the same Vulkan and bringing him back into the modern setting. He would return with 10,000 years of additional knowledge, experience, and time to perfect his craft. Just imagine Vulkan returning with equipment specifically designed to kill demon Primarchs. Imagine him wearing armor that is able to nullify or disrupt the warp around him. Hell, imagine him creating a weapon that can permanently destroy a demon or bypass their immortality. And with Vulkan's smithing ability, the possibilities are truly endless. Add to that, his perpetual nature, and man oh man, this agenda becomes a true runaway train. Because the biggest problem with fighting Vulkan is that eventually, everyone runs out of options. Like tell me folks, if Vulkan and the Lion fought on a grass field in a one-on-one with no restrictions, and this pains me to say as a Dark Angels fanboy, but even with the fact that the Lion is one of the greatest duelists among his brothers, the reality is there is nothing, absolutely nothing in the Lion's arsenal that can permanently kill Vulkan. The Lion could outfight him, land countless strikes, and kill him over and over again, but like I've said a million times throughout this video, Vulkan would just simply return. It might take hours, it might take weeks, it might even take months, but ultimately Vulkan would rise again and continue the fight. His victory is inevitable, just like the Mad Titan Thanos would say. And the same logic applies to the demon Primarchs. Angron could smash Vulkan into little tiny pieces. Fulgrim could completely outspeed him and slice him apart. Mortarion and Perturabo could unleash devastating plagues, biological warfare, and heinous diseases against him. But against Vulkan, attrition is not a weakness. Attrition is Vulkan's greatest advantage. The longer the fight continues, the more the battle begins to favor Vulkan, because while his opponents will grow tired, make mistakes, and slowly lose their advantage, Vulkan's perpetual nature will keep him in the fight. Now, since we're discussing the demon Primarchs, there are two major exceptions that could create interesting matchups: Magnus and Lorgar. Magnus is probably the biggest question mark because we've already seen that Vulkan required the Emperor's empowerment in the Webway to regenerate faster than Magnus could destroy him. Magnus possesses the kind of psychic power that could actually threaten Vulkan. And then there's Lorgar, who with his mastery of Enuncia, supposedly, he may possess abilities that could potentially affect Vulkan's perpetual nature permanently, since we don't know the true extent and power of Enuncia. But we've seen it used against some of the more powerful beings in the setting, like John Chromaticus using it on God Emperor Horus Lubercal. So if Lorgar is, as they say, a master of Enuncia, he may very well be the greatest threat to Vulkan. And there are other beings throughout the 40k universe that could bypass or overpower Vulkan's perpetual nature, like Catan Shards, the Silent King, or other powerful psychic beings. But if we are playing the what if game, imagine Vulkan returned in a similar way to Guilliman. Imagine Vulkan returning empowered by the Emperor himself, maybe carrying one of the Emperor's forgotten relics. A weapon infused with the Emperor's psychic power that allows him to continuously revive through the Emperor's own light and power, giving him the kind of regeneration we saw in Echoes of Eternity. At that point, Vulkan would no longer just be an incredibly powerful Primarch. He would be an unkillable Primarch with 10,000 years of additional knowledge, potentially new god-killing weapons, and possibly direct empowerment from the Emperor. And that is why, if Vulkan ever returns, he immediately becomes one of the most powerful Primarchs in the modern setting of 40k. Before we end this video, I want to give a massive shout out to Crab and Musty in my Discord. You guys are the bee's knees for helping me put this bad boy together, as well as all of the other Vulkan stands in my beautiful herd. You all have slowly but surely worn me down with your endless kindness and your shared hatred for the Eldar. So yeah, this video goes out to you guys. This series has been a ton of fun to make. We started with Russ, then moved on to Dorn, and now we have finally tackled Vulkan. As for what comes next, I'm thinking about either diving into Corvus Corax or Mr. Gunrad Gers. As always, a huge shout out to my Patreon and YouTube members: Bad Ariel, Anish Chatterjee, Caleb White, Dink Colberry, Musty Impossible Paul, Clayton, Hollow, Diomedes 22, Keydri, Morley Bankrupt 1461, Jack Roar, Lag, and Seth Capizilla. Appreciate you guys a ton. You guys are the goats. I mean cows. The Emperor video should be coming out sometime next week, so make sure you keep your eyes peeled on the horizon for that one. It should be around 3 hours in length. So as you all know, in true Falling Cow fashion, it's going to be packed, absolutely packed with excerpts and facts. So if you want to see the most in-depth power scaling Emperor video on the platform, go give it a like and a comment. But as always, stay milked herd, and I'll see you all real soon.